In this movie, you build a set of shapes to act as control objects to manipulate the spine. There are many ways to rig a spine, depending on how easy or complex you want it to be. Some riggers use IK solutions, others use spline IK solvers. Here, you will actually be using a simple yet effective FK approach that relies mostly on orientation constraints. Start by creating a circle centered between the character's feet. You don't need to be accurate, you're about to realign it to the character's center of mass. Set the radius to about 15. This should be big enough to go around the geometry of the body. Enable spline rendering in the viewport and set the thickness to about 0.4. Since you're not ultimately rendering this object, you can make it easier to process by reducing its calculation. This can be done by reducing its size value and also its interpolation. Name the new circle Zombie Com Control to signify this is a controller for the character's center of mass. Basically, this will be the main position controller for the upper body. Align it to the pelvis, pivot to pivot, in position XYZ only. You need more shape controllers if you're going to manipulate the spine. You will need 4 actually. Some will affect one bone at a time, others will affect many. Create a smaller circle with a radius of 13. Name it Zombie Hip Controller. Align it also to the pelvis bone. Here, though, you'll need to align the controller to the bone in position and in orientation. Whereas the comp shape you created earlier is meant to affect the upper body position, this shape is meant to affect the hip rotation. You want to ensure both hip and shape are oriented the same way because you want to use an orientation constraint between them. It's always easier when the two objects are initially looking in the same direction. However, as you can see, this makes the circle stand up. Convert the circle to an editable spline and then go to spline mode. Using a local rotation, rotate the spline 90 degrees on its local y-axis. You can use angle snap, A on the keyboard, for accuracy. Exit subobject mode when done. Using Edit Clone, make a copy of the hip control shape and name it Zombie Spine Base Controller. Align it to the spine base, spine 1, in position and orientation. At this time, both the hip and the spine base controllers are of the same size since they are clones of each other. To make the spine controller bigger or smaller, do not scale it directly. This affects the transform matrix of the object and is bound to give you problems later. Instead, go to Spline Subobject mode and scale it down at a subobject level. This shifts vertices and preserves the object's transform matrix intact. With the spine-based controller selected, make another copy and name it Zombie Neck Base Controller. Align the new bone to the neck bone in position and orientation. If you wish, you can make it smaller still, again scaling it at a subobject level. You can also temporarily unhide the geometry to give you a sense of scale. The idea is to make controllers easy to select, even if the character's body is visible in the scene. Finally, make one last copy. Name it Zombie Head Controller. Align it to the head bone in position and orientation. Set the COM controller to a red wire color and the other controllers to a blue wire color. You can even make the hip controller a darker blue to differentiate it from the controllers affecting the spine. We've been using blue colors for rotations, FK situations, and red color for positions, IK situations. Let's stick to that. In fact, other ways to differentiate controllers can be done at the shape level too. They don't all have to be circles. Select the hip controller and isolate it. Temporarily disable its render status in the viewport. Go into Segment Subobject mode and select the 4 segments that make the circle. Lower in the panel, set the number of divisions to 7 and click the Divide button. You now have a total of 32 vertices around the circle instead of just 4. Press T to switch to a top view. In Vertex mode, alternate the selection of vertices by ensuring you select every other one. Use the Scale tool in Selection Center mode and scale the vertices down a bit to create a wave effect. Exit Vertex mode when done and enable spline rendering in the viewport again. Exit Isolate mode. Before you move on to rigging the spine, select all the shape controllers you created and then Alt right-click and freeze their transforms. This is an all too important task, as was discussed previously. It ensures the current position and orientation of each controller are regarded as initial poses. Finally, you need to make some hierarchical sense of all this. Currently, the pelvis bone is generally acting like a master bone. Instead, select both the pelvis and spine bones and link them to the main COM controller. This way, when you move or rotate that controller, the rest of the skeleton reacts to that motion. Similarly, select the rest of the blue controllers and link them to the master controller. As you move or rotate the center of mass, you now have a nice solution that follows. Of course, you have yet to define the functionality of the individual spine controllers to make the spine and head bend, twist, and react. This will be your next task.